Bobby, can you talk to me a little bit about the Montgomery County Jails Coalition over the past few years? I know there's been a lot of concern over the deaths that have happened in the jail. If you can kind of go through in your research, how many deaths have you found at like over a certain span of years? And, how did this idea come up to even think of doing a civilian oversight committee and then get into researching all of it?
Yeah. So the Montgomery Jail Coalition's mission, originally started around trying to ensure that the county did not build a new giant jail. And that mission was successful. That was back in 2019, 2020. Since then, our mission has really revolved around two main things, which is reducing the jail population, so that, advocating for diversion, for increased mental health, disability services, addiction recovery services, to reduce the overall population. Because while the jail population right now is lower than it's been, it's still too high. And then the second piece is ensuring that people who do end up detained in the jail have their human rights recognized and upheld while they're detained. We have, um, you know, so in 2023, 7 people died in the jail. Um, and that spike really led our group to start asking some questions and looking for more transparency and accountability from the sheriff and also the county commissioners who oversee the funding of the jail. In 2024, video was released of the death of Isaiah Trammell. And this is the first time that the public, as well as, including folks in our coalition, really got to see. I hesitate to even use the word had to see, we're able to see what really goes on in there and so the reality of some of these deaths. Obviously that story, sparked a lot of media coverage. It also kind of energized our community around this issue. And we went to county commission meetings. We called the sheriff. We asked them to do something. Those calls were met with relative silence and a brushing off. And the party line seems to be that the new renovations to the jail will solve all these problems. Well, if you watch that video of Isaiah Trammell, there's no amount of renovations that are going to change the fact that he was verbally assaulted by officers, that he was then not given a safe place given his own circumstances to be, that he was detained or restrained for a significant amount of time. So we don't believe that renovation can fix that. Flash forward to this year, another video comes out, this time of Christian Black. And again, you see in these tapes that it's not a lack of facilities that are leading people to die here. It's the actual culture of abuse and violence inflicted upon detainees in the jail that is causing them to die. Christian Black's death was ruled a homicide. And when we look at all of this and we hear from the sheriff and from the county administrator that soon the jail will be renovated, soon being a relative term because we haven't heard any specific timeline on when that will happen. That for us doesn't change the fact that there's something really wrong going on inside that jail, and it starts with the culture of the people who work there, both the COs and the NAF care staff who are in charge of the healthcare of the people detained there. And so for us, if accountability and transparency is not going to come from the people in charge and the people working inside, then it has to come from the community. And this is, as we've gone out and we've talked to the families of people whose loved ones have died or been abused in the jail, these are the things that they're calling for. Is an ability for the community to see what's going on, to react to that, and to influence the powers that be to make things better and safer for the people detained in that jail. In 2017, because of a slew of lawsuits, civil rights lawsuits against the jail, Sheriff Phil Plummer at the time came out and said that he was going to create a civilian oversight committee. That committee was never created. Instead, we had the Justice Committee, which came out with really specific findings about things that needed to change in the jail. And to our knowledge, those things still haven't changed. And so it feels like, you know, this is something at one time county commissioners were actively calling for, and the sheriff was announcing, yes, we're going to have civilian oversight. That was 5 years ago. In those 5 years, over 10 people have died in the jail. Montgomery County has one of, if not the deadliest jail in the state of Ohio. And so we believe that now is the time to invest in civilian oversight.
Absolutely. And, I know that you just had a petition go around, get signed, and that was presented to the county. Um, when we're talking about this study, was it important to the coalition to do a study with facts behind so that you could also present that? So you're not just presenting a petition, but can you kind of talk about the importance of uh, pushing to get this, but having something solid behind you?
Sure. I mean, this idea of civilian oversight is not novel, right? It's not our idea. And I think like even our pushing for this is based on research that had already been done um, by members of our coalition into different jails that have either similar instances of death or also work with NAFCARE as their primary medical provider to see like how are other folks around the country holding their counties responsible for what goes on in their jails. And that was really the spark. So yeah, it's imperative to us to not just say, hey, we want civilian oversight, now figure it out. We feel it's responsible to also say, hey, we want civilian oversight because it works. Here's some examples of how it works. Here's some examples of specific things we think will apply really well to Montgomery County's jail system and could be implemented relatively easily. And so, yeah, we want to provide as much information as possible. That's not at all to discount the 2,100 people who signed a petition because, you know, we can provide all the research we want, but if people are not concerned, then our leaders are not compelled to move. I would hope that our leaders would be compelled to move because they've heard the voices of 2,100 people saying, hey, we need something different. And now we're kind of saying, here's some guidelines. Here are some ways that this has worked in the past. And here are some ways that this has been successful in the past. Because sure, it bolsters the argument, and it also provides a framework. We want to be collaborators with the county in this process, right? This is not meant to be like an adversarial thing, right? I hope that we all want the same thing, which is people being safe. And so this report is a way of us saying like, hey, here's some ways we can do this. Let's collaborate on a way to get it done.
Absolutely. And kind of wrapping up with you, Bobby. So then tonight you're doing a virtual meeting, right? And so just give me a little bit of what you're hoping to, goes into that. And then this Friday, I believe, was that the timeline that you were hoping to kind of hear something back from the county?
That's correct. Yep. So Friday, August 1st was the kind of deadline that we gave the county to respond. We have not received a response from the county commissioners or directly from the sheriff or the county administrator. So we are still waiting on that and hopeful that we'll hear something here soon. Tonight is just about educating the community on, we have a lot of people who are supportive of this. And so tonight is about educating the community on what this actually looks like. Okay, we've proposed this thing. Now we want to tell you what it's all about. We want to show you how this works. We want to show you some examples of other places that have instituted some of these things to keep the community kind of connected and engaged along these issues. Yeah, so like I said, we're very hopeful that we'll hear from the sheriff and hear from the county commissioners in the next couple of days so that we can really start working on what civilian oversight in Montgomery County can look like.
Absolutely. Lydia, I want to bounce it to you now. Can you give me a little bit of background about how long you all did your research and just a little bit of what went into this study?
Yeah, so we've been collaborating for the last 2 months about working on research. There are me and three other interns. So there's a team of four interns, each of us individually working about 10 hours a week. So we're putting in about, 40 hours a week collectively for the last 8 weeks or so. Um, Researching different parts of our report. So, as Bobby was alluding to, of course, we have case studies from around the country, and we have some recommendations of characteristics we would like to see implemented in an oversight body. But we also needed to, of course, analyze what are some existing jail oversights that already exist. So, governmental oversights and external auditors. So, we were really researching a lot of what is already out there, right? What is overseeing a county jail, because this is very unique and different than a prison, for example. And because, around 75% of detainees at a county jail are held pre-trial, it's a big difference than, someone who's actually been sentenced and is in jail or prison for being convicted of a crime. So we wanted to see what is already existing out there and what are some of the downfalls or pitfalls of existing methods of oversight, and then how have other county jails responded to having similar legal frameworks and created their own oversight bodies that are some are entirely civilian oversight and some are a collaboration of a bunch of different individuals such as public defenders and mental health counselors, addiction counselors, and then some members of the public. So we tried to find some varying examples where, again, some are entirely civilian and some are more of a mixture because we think it's important to include multiple different perspectives.
Absolutely. And, I did receive a statement when I did the story about the announcement of the petition being delivered. The county did send out a statement, and part of their statement was saying, we already have oversight from all these bodies. And I think you're alluding to, governmental bodies, essentially. So what were your findings, I guess, what are some of the maybe the downfalls of only having that type of oversight? And then what did you find in these areas that have civilian oversight? Like what are kind of the differences? So kind of plus minuses here.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we saw obviously the response you had as well. And so some of those we had already researched and others have not. We delve deeper into to understand what they do already. And so what we saw specifically for one of them that was mentioned was the Bureau of Adult Detention, or abbreviated as BAD, ironically. And that is charged with the investigation and supervision of county and municipal jails and workhouses. And so while we noticed that their primary focus is to ensure compliance with minimum standards of jails that are created across the state, it is important to note that they do not possess the authority to investigate or adjudicate criminal misconduct or negligence in county jails. And as Bobby was saying earlier, we're noticing that this is not just the jail itself that's a problem, but the culture within it, with the corrections officers and things like that. And so if we have an entity that is supposed to oversee our county jails that doesn't have the authority to investigate criminal misconduct or negligence, that's a shortcoming. Of course, because we're seeing that is a cultural problem. But if they can't look into that, then their oversight is limited really to just making sure that there is some secure, humane, and efficient operations of these jails. Another thing that we also heard from that was the public health of Dayton and Montgomery County as being a method of oversight, which to our understanding promotes policies and creates systems to enable good health in the county, including in the jails. They only have 6 reports that are available, though. So this is not a very transparent form of oversight. And within all the reports that we read, they're really focusing on things of like stagnant water, missing ceiling tiles, build up on ventilation, things like that. But there's no review of other things such as adequate health care or physical abuse or neglect of detainees or in custody deaths. So while they may be saying there is the jail is meeting building code, we're not looking deeper into the health of those detainees. And then finally, we also heard about the Marshals services through the response that we had received. And with the Marshal services, with the Marshal services, we had noticed that that was also a little bit of a shortcoming because the marshals did not have the authority to, and I just want to make sure that I am giving you the correct information really quick. So pulling up the report.
Take your time.
Okay, yeah. So because they have like the power to investigate county jails, since county jails can hold over the federal hold over detainees if a federal prison it is past capacity, they can be held in county jail. So the U.S. Marshal Services is able to investigate county jails, but again, there's a problem with transparency. So the Marshal Service infrequently publishes its findings for public audiences, and so the reports are also really inconsistent that are published. And because of their infrequency and their lack of transparency, this is a really difficult oversight body for the community to look at, which again was a problem that we noticed. And so with that, some of the recommendations that we had, of course, focused around independence, so having an entity that exists that is not influenced by the sheriff, the jail administration, or even political officials. But we also want to make sure that they, of course, are very transparent in what's going on and issuing regular reports and not just giving us maybe 6 in the span of 8 years.
Absolutely. And then when you were looking at these places that have civilian oversight committees, or to your point, maybe a mixture of who's involved on those committees, what were some of, did you see any benefits that were, tangible, or did you find that any things in those places had changed?
Yeah, I mean, there were some that we looked at, and at first, I know one of the first places I investigated that or researched that I had heard a lot about was Essex County, New Jersey, having a great civilian task force with a variety of members from advocacy groups, criminal defense attorneys, corrections experts, and then members of the public. But ultimately, that task force was largely inactive. So despite it being formed 6 years ago, it has not issued any reports and has completely been silent for the last 2 years, which has received a lot of public criticism. And that's something we want to avoid. We want this to be a permanent oversight body. And so other places like Delaware County, Pennsylvania, their oversight board we found to be a very high praise because it's been so active for the last 6 years since it was formed. And this has a very diverse board of members. So it has the sheriff is on the board. It has 2 judges, the county controller, the executive director of the county, the chair of the county council, and then 3 citizen appointees. And so there is, 1/3 of the members who are from the community themselves, which is great because that's what we want to see. We want to see more civilian involvement in this oversight. And the board in Delaware County has the authority to investigate a variety of things. So they can look into living conditions, they can conduct unannounced inspections, they can ensure the jail operates according to the law or the standards set by the law, and also investigate allegations of inadequate conditions and improper practices, which is something we see, of course, in Ohio with the Bureau of Adult Detention being a shortcoming, is that they don't have that authority to investigate criminal misconduct and negligence within the jail, which is really a big problem that we're seeing.
And I don't know, were you able to reach out to any of these oversight bodies and find out, how have things improved, I guess, because like that's the overall goal, is for things to not kind of be going down the same, the same track. So can you just kind of talk about any information you learned about improvements?
Yeah, so we didn't reach out directly to any of these boards, but especially the ones that received high praise. And while I only give you an example of 2, our report includes 4 in total. A lot of these have, aside from the Essex County one, have very consistent reportings, host monthly meetings, and have them via Zoom and in person. And with this hybrid model, they then released the recordings of their meetings. So we were able to actually watch their monthly meetings and see what was going on, states away from them, and see, last year or from 2021, what they were talking about. And we found that to be very reassuring to know that they are not only heavily involved, but that they want to make sure that the community knows what they're doing. And yeah, so we have seen in several different locations. I know in Washington, for example, Washington State, we saw that their oversight body had individually investigated 3,400 cases last year, to which they were able to resolve 3,200 of those themselves through their own investigations, which are high numbers. And is great because we've seen them be able to help a lot of these incarcerated individuals and detainees to rehouse them if that's what they need, or provide them with mental health counseling or addiction services, or anything like that, disability services as well. So yeah, we definitely saw some inspiration from other areas that were doing wonderful things. And although we didn't contact them individually, we saw a lot of their reports online, and also praise from the media and the public surrounding it.